The car in my driveway says one thing about me. My bank account says the exact opposite. I wash it every Sunday. I keep it looking sharp in the neighbor's eye line. Meanwhile, the payment on it eats a quarter of what I bring home. I've told myself a dozen different stories about why that's fine. This is a letter for the men, maintaining an image they can no longer actually afford, and are starting to realize the image was never actually the point. I didn't set out to build a lie. It happened gradually, the way most financial facades do, one upgrade at a time, each one individually defensible, each one quietly outpacing what I could actually sustain. A nicer car because the old one felt embarrassing next to the neighbors. A bigger house because that's what a man at my stage of life was supposed to have. Vacations posted at the exact resolution that made them look effortless, never showing the credit card statement that funded them. Each choice made sense alone. Stacked together, they built a life that looked successful from the outside and felt like a slow-motion emergency from the inside. Here's the uncomfortable question I eventually had to sit with. Who specifically was all of this actually for? Not my family. They'd have been fine in a smaller house, an older car, a life that matched our actual income. It was for a version of judgment I imagined happening in rooms I wasn't even in. Former classmates, distant relatives, neighbors I barely spoke to, all supposedly keeping score of a competition none of them had actually entered. I was going into real, dangerous debt to win an argument nobody but me was having. There's a specific storm that comes from maintaining two completely different financial realities at once. The one everyone sees, and the one that actually determines whether the lights stay on. Every month became a quiet performance of triage. Which bill gets the real payment? Which one gets minimum? Which one gets a phone call asking for an extension I hoped nobody in my life would ever find out I made? Meanwhile, the car stayed washed. The image stayed intact. The storm stayed entirely invisible to everyone except me. Maintaining an illusion that convincing is exhausting. In a way, actual poverty, paradoxically, sometimes isn't. Because at least honest hardship doesn't require also managing everyone else's perception of it. There's a specific night every man maintaining a facade eventually faces. The night the math simply refuses to work anymore, no matter how creatively you arrange it. Mine came with a repair bill on the car I could barely afford to keep, on top of a month that had already borrowed against the next one twice already. I sat with the actual numbers, fully lit, no more optimistic rounding, and understood clearly for the first time exactly how deep the gap between appearance and reality had actually gotten. That night didn't feel like clarity. It felt like drowning. Clarity arrived later, once the initial panic passed. I had convinced myself somewhere along the way that maintaining the image was itself a form of protection, that looking successful somehow insulated me from the consequences of not actually being financially stable. It doesn't. The car gets repossessed regardless of how impressive it looked in the driveway. The debt collectors don't care how good the vacation photos were. The image protects nothing. It just delays the reckoning while quietly making it more expensive when it finally arrives. That's the actual lie at the center of the whole performance. That looking fine is a substitute for being fine. It never was. It just felt like one for a while to everyone, including me. If this is landing, hit subscribe, because tearing down a facade you've maintained for years takes a specific kind of discipline. And I want to walk through exactly what that looks like.
Fixing this required something that felt, at first, like the opposite of discipline. Deliberately letting the image collapse instead of continuing to prop it up. It meant selling the car for something I actually owned outright, even though it looked like a step backward to anyone watching. It meant admitting to my own family the real numbers, not the version I'd been managing, even at home. It meant tolerating the discomfort of driving something unimpressive past the same neighbors I used to wash the old car for. That's discipline in its most counterintuitive form, the discipline of choosing to look less successful in service of actually becoming financially stable. Here's what actually happened when the image finally cracked versus what I'd spent years terrified of happening. Almost nothing. Nobody organized a conversation about my downgraded car. Nobody I actually respected thought less of me for it. The judgment I'd been so afraid of turned out to be almost entirely imaginary. A courtroom I built inside my own head, presided over by people who were mostly too busy managing their own quiet financial performances to notice mine. That realization, arriving late, was almost more painful than the debt itself. I'd sacrificed real financial stability for an audience that was never actually watching that closely. Rebuilding meant setting a new standard, deliberately smaller than what the old image demanded. Live at a level the actual numbers support, not the level the imagined audience expects. That's a harder discipline to maintain than it sounds, because the old instinct to upgrade doesn't disappear just because you've identified it. It shows up again the first time a friend buys something new, the first time an old neighbor's driveway gets an upgrade of its own. The discipline is catching that instinct each time and asking the actual question again. Is this for my family, or is this for a courtroom that was never real? My kids never once mentioned the car. They noticed instead that the fights about money got quieter. They noticed I stopped disappearing into a closed office door to manage a financial performance nobody else in the house was even watching. The image I'd spent years maintaining for an imagined audience was invisible to the actual audience that mattered most, the people living inside the real numbers with me the whole time, who never once cared about the version of success I thought I owed them. So look honestly at what you're actually maintaining and who it's actually for. Not your family, probably not even the neighbors, who are almost certainly too consumed with their own quiet performance to be grading yours as closely as you fear. Let the image collapse on purpose, on your own terms, before the math forces the collapse on its terms instead. Sell the car. Tell the truth about the numbers. Drive something unimpressive past people who were never actually watching that closely to begin with. The car in my driveway used to say one thing while my bank account said another. Now they finally agree with each other. That agreement is worth more than any driveway ever was.